This conference will now be recorded.
So start with Docker. So what is a Docker? Docker is a containerization tool. What is the concept of Docker, or what is a containerization concept? So if you want to understand the purpose of Docker first, let's talk about the differences between a containerization versus virtualization. So we know the concept of virtualization, right? So what is the concept of virtualization? If I want to create a virtual instance, how to create a virtual instance? So for example, let's say there is some server. Okay. So this is some host. Let's say I have some host or some server, and my host or my server has some configuration. So that's a hard disk, and then support memory. So this is my host configuration, and I want to create virtual instances on this. How do you create virtual instances? What do you need? What do we install first? Okay, let's say my host has some OS. Take about my host has which OS? Let's say some Windows OS. On that, so we install something. How to create virtual instances? We need virtualization tool, hypervisor tool. Which one? You can use VMware Workstation or Oracle Virtual Boxes. We have different tools. Let's talk about VMware. So once VMware is installed, then using the VMware we can create virtual instances, right? So how do you create virtual instances? So you go to virtual instance, you open VMware Workstation. So once you open your VMware Workstation, create your virtual instances. Follow some steps to do it, right? So in those steps, so what is the first step is? You allocate resources for each instance, right? You allocate the resources, right? Memory and then hard disk. Right? So that's first step is. First step is allocate resources. Now, my instance, I'm going to allocate some resources. So what resources? Let's say something like 6 GB RAM and then some hard disk. That's my hard disk. So once resources allocated for the instance, in the second step, what do? We install. What do we install? OS, right? So let's take some OS, something like RHEL6. And after OS is installed, in the last step, then we install the tools. Let's say I'm installing some tools on this instance. I'm installing Jenkins tool. So I want to create more instances. Follow the same steps. So what are the steps? First, allocate resources. So allocate resources first, and also memory as well as hard disk with some OS, RHEL7, whatever you want to install, and then some tools. Let's say I'm using it for Ansible purpose. So now, what are the steps again? Allocate resources, resource allocation, and then secondly, you go with install OS. So what we call that OS, or what we call those instances? When you, yeah, what was that? Guest instance, right? So what is guest means? Your virtual instance is a guest, and what is a host? So wherever you have virtual instances running, that machine is called host instance. Okay, then so where every guest has to be installed guest OS first. If the guest OS is not installed, can I use the instance? I cannot use the instance. Okay, well, so these are the two steps. Now go to instance one. This is my instance one. On this instance one, So I'm using Jenkins. I have installed Jenkins. I'm using Jenkins on it. Since I have installed Jenkins, then so I have started working on Jenkins. But most probably at maximum, I'm using my maximum resources are I'm going with 4 GB. That means the Jenkins has never used a memory up to the maximum. It has used up to maximum up to 4 GB and not beyond that. And same as with Ansible. For Ansible, let's say my Ansible is using about 5 GB or 6 GB. But how much is allocated? About 8 GB is allocated. Right? So what is the drawback with this concept? Sorry? Now, can I say that for these instances, so I've allocated resources first and which are static. Those are not dynamic. What do you mean by not dynamic? So I want to change my resources dynamically according to the usage. But initially I have already allocated the resources, right? So, but for example, let's say sometimes what might happen, Jenkins has used its resources more than the allocated. How much is allocated now? 6 GB, but it needs about 8 GB memory. Is it possible? No, right? So if that happens, your instance will be crashed. The reason is initially I have allocated statically, I have allocated some resources. That is the reason. But what's the solution for this? What's the solution? So why do we have these issues? We have issues because resources allocated statically. So then what's the solution? Dynamic resource allocation. Okay. For example, Jenkins needs about 10 GB RAM. Then your host must allocate 10 GB RAM to the instance. That is not possible with virtualization concept. Okay. So that is a drawback with virtualization. So the first drawback is static resource allocation is the first drawback. Okay, which is what we call static resource allocation. Okay, that's the first drawback with virtualization. And what is the second drawback? What is the second drawback? So for example, I'm creating about 10 instances. So every instance must have guest OS. Okay, every instance must have its guest OS. Okay, so these are the two drawbacks with virtualization. Can we overcome these drawbacks? Yes, we can overcome the drawbacks. What is the concept is? So, and there you have a containerization concept. Now, I would prefer a containerization concept rather than virtualization. So I will go with containerization. Now, what is a container? Container is also like an instance. But what are the differences between and virtualization versus containerization? Okay, let's talk about it. Now, so I have host again. So host, and then has some memory and also some. So the hard disk is 1 TB, and then let's say it's about not hard, yeah, and then 24 GB RAM. That's memory. Okay. So on the host, your host might have any type of OS. So host might have Windows OS or Linux OS. Every host requires some OS. Let's say I have some host, and that's my OS. Okay. Now I'm not going to install any hypervisor. That means I'm not installing VMware here. Instead, I would be installing Docker. Now I'm installing Docker on this. So I have replaced VMware Workstation with Docker. So once you install Docker on that instance or on your host, then that is what we call Docker host. Wherever you have Docker installed is what we call Docker host. Okay. Now we have Docker host ready. And once we have Docker host ready, So what do we do? With the help of Docker, so we create containers. Let's create containers. Now, what do you mean by a container? So container is nothing but an instance, like your virtual instance. But what makes a difference? Now, initially, I need an container. So whenever you need a container, and you need to do two things. If you want to create a container in Docker, or if you want to create instance, you can say, using Docker. So how you create it? You follow two steps. Okay. So what are those steps? The first step is, so Docker pull and then Ubuntu. Okay, let's say Ubuntu. Now, so this is my instance, right? On this instance, or I mean a container. On the container, so what is the OS I want? I want OS which is Ubuntu. So usually in virtualization, what are the steps you follow? You create first a virtual instance, and once you create a virtual instance, you install OS on it. This is what you do on virtualization. But this is, how do you do the same things on Docker? I want to create a Docker container with Ubuntu OS. So what are the steps we follow? Now, the steps are, first you go with, what is the command is Docker pull Ubuntu. So what is pulling means? Downloading. So what I'm trying to download? I'm trying to download an Ubuntu image. So what is an image? Image is nothing but an executable file. So what I'm doing first, I'm pulling that image. So how I'm pulling that image? Using a command called Docker pull image. But where is the image? From where we are downloading it? From Docker registry or Docker hub. So we have hub.docker.com. That's the URL, hub.docker.com, which is Docker registry. Okay. So second, hub.docker.com, your Docker registry, and what is available on Docker registry? On Docker registry, Docker has defined images that define the images. Now these are the images to pull it. Available on the Docker registry. I'm going to pull those images. Okay. Well, so let it be loaded. And the image we are looking for. What's the image? So the image name is Ubuntu. Going with Ubuntu. So Docker Hub home page. So if you want to pull the images, so do I need to sign up or do I need to sign in? So if I want to pull an image, do I need an account on Docker registry? You don't have any accounts on Docker registry. That's not required. Now, what is the image? Image name is Ubuntu. So search for the image. There is the image Ubuntu. Now, this is your Docker official image. So this image is already defined by the Docker. So they have already defined the images. We take the images and then we download them, run them. So how do you download it? What is the command? Docker pull Ubuntu. What is Ubuntu then? Ubuntu is your image name. See that image name? Image name. So we are pulling the image. Pulling means downloading it. So I have downloaded. So whenever images are downloaded or pulled, so images are saved actually. Where the images are saved into the Docker host. This is my Docker host. Images are saved onto the Docker host. Now, so what is the second step? Docker run and then image name was. So two commands always So what is the first command is docker pull image name. What is the image name is Ubuntu. Then docker run Ubuntu. Ubuntu is an image. Now what happens when you run an image? Whenever you run an image, and this run command creates an container. So we have a container created. So that's my container 1, and this container has some OS. Which OS that is? Ubuntu. Right now, did I install Ubuntu on it? So I have not installed it. So this is whenever you run an image, that image has created container. The container already has your Ubuntu running. So that is what is an image. What image does? Image creates a container, and that container has your OS running. And once your container has with Ubuntu installed or already installed, and then I can start installing Jenkins on it as usual. Okay. Now for this instance or this container, how much resources are required? Instance might need about 4 GB RAM. Then what Docker host does? Host is going to allocate the required resources for this 4 GB RAM, about like 100 GB hard disk, and in the future it needs about 8 GB. So again, the 8 GB resources will be allocated. After some time, it needs only about 3 GB or 2 GB. So resources allocated dynamically for the containers by the host. Host means we talk about Docker host. What is a Docker host? Wherever Docker is installed, that is what we call Docker host. Okay. On the host, we have Docker containers running. Okay, fine. So I need another image. I need another container. I need a second container. I need container 2, second container. On this container, I need CentOS. Okay. Now, so what do you do first? How do you create the containers? When the containers are created, when we run the image. Okay. So what is the image I need? CentOS. Okay. See, since I need CentOS image, yes, registry for registry, and then try with CentOS. There is CentOS. So this is also a Docker official image. What do you mean Docker official image? These images are defined by the Docker. So Docker already predefined them. That means, so when you see official image, that means can we have unofficial images? That means can we have our custom images? For example, I'm a user. I want to create my own image. Can I create an image? Yes, that's possible. That is the reason they have categorically mentioned that this is an official image by the Docker. Okay. So let me show you some image. So some image, okay, don't worry about what is that image, but look at that image. That image was created by user. So he is the user, he is the owner of the image. So you can see that he is the owner. So for example, let's say I want to create my own images. Okay, so see that these are my images. So these are my images. So then I'm the owner of that image. So I'm the owner. Okay, so we can also have custom images, right? So you can define your own image. That is also possible. But in what cases we create custom images, we'll talk about that in the future. But so initially, let's talk about predefined images. CentOS. So what is the image is Docker pull CentOS. Now that's the first command. So Docker pull CentOS. CentOS, and second is Docker run. Sorry, second command is Docker run CentOS. Now, since I have run that CentOS image, what that command does, now this creates a container. There is my container. Okay, and this container has, what is the OS? CentOS. Did I install CentOS? Did I install the guest OS on that instance, on the container? Did I install it? So I have not installed guest OS. So this is automatically created by default when I run that image. You don't need this. You don't need to install guest OS. And do I need to allocate resources statically for the instance, for the containers? Not required. So those two drawbacks, whatever we had with virtualization with containers concept. Okay. So this is sometimes a question. So this is a very, very basic question. How do you compare with your virtualization versus a containerization? So virtual instances need to install guest OS, whereas containers don't need any guest OS. You don't need to install them. And also resource allocation. Resource allocation in virtualization is done statically, but whereas containers, resource allocation is done dynamically. Okay. Right. Now I need another container now, a third container, and that third container, that's my third container. Again, I need Ubuntu. I need a third container with same OS, which is Ubuntu OS. Okay. Now tell me, what do I do? We run it. Don't we pull it? Already we have pulled it, right? So pulling is nothing but downloading. You don't need to download every time. So go with straight away. You can run the second command. Docker run. Okay, I'm running the same Ubuntu image about 10 times. I've run that same Docker run Ubuntu image 10 times. Is it going to create 10 different containers? So if I run that image, if I run the command Docker run Ubuntu, is it going to create 10 different containers or only one container? One container, 10 different containers. So initially I have run that Docker run Ubuntu, right? So what was the container? Container 1. Again I have run that Docker run Ubuntu. So what is that? Container 3. If I run that same Docker run Ubuntu, another container. So every time when you run it, it creates a new container. So Docker run and an image creates a container for us. Okay. So remember, so this is also one of the questions in interviews. So I have same container. So I have same image, and I have run that about number of times. Is it going to create 10 number of different containers? Yes, it creates number of different containers. Okay, but I want to use the same container. So is it possible? That's possible. We'll talk about that practically. But so in general, it is when you run an image, it creates a container. That's a concept. Okay. Now, so what type of images they are? What is that Ubuntu CentOS? What are they? Operating systems, OS. Apart from OS, can we have application containers? We can also have application containers. Now, what's advantage of going for application containers? What advantage? Okay, let me give you an example. So which is familiar to us. So let's go with. What is that? Jenkins, right? Okay. So take Jenkins. So what is the command? Docker pull Jenkins. Okay, I pull it. That's the first command. Is Jenkins an application or not? It's an application. Now Docker run Jenkins. Now, so what is the second command again? Docker run Jenkins. Tell me what this command does for us. What has to be happening when you run an image? Creates a container. Okay, creates a container. Fine. That's my another container. Then, so what will be running on this container? So there is your Jenkins running. But am I installing OS? There is no OS concept. There is no guest OS concept. That is what we call Docker. There is no guest OS concept at all. So you can still have your applications running in it. So no guest OS and then no installation of the applications. So you have the applications running. So this is how in AWS your Beanstalk works. They are using Docker containers, sorry, Docker images. That is how your Beanstalk works in AWS. So if you have that question, how AWS knows when I select Tomcat as my application, how Beanstalk knows it has to have your Tomcat running using the images concept. Okay, so now you understand this concept. So you can have your OS containers, or you can also have application containers. But what is my Jenkins application container? What's its OS? So we don't know as a user. So the only concept what I need is I want to have my Jenkins running. You can have your Jenkins running. You start using your Jenkins. So there is no guest OS. But I want to have my Jenkins installed on some CentOS. Is it possible? For example, you are a developer, or you are a you are a developer. Let's say you are a developer. So you have a requirement saying that you want to use Jenkins. So I'm a DevOps engineer. You need some Jenkins for your purpose. So what do you ask me? You need an Jenkins on some CentOS. But if I give you that option, you can pull the image called Docker pull Jenkins and Docker run Jenkins. But that Jenkins, what OS it has, we don't know. That is decided by the Docker. But you said that you need only this kind of requirement. I want Jenkins should be running on CentOS. How is that possible then? Yes. So what do I do as a DevOps engineer? I take your requirement. Once I take a requirement, I will be creating an custom image. I create a custom image for you, right? once I create a custom image, how do you create the custom images? So there's a concept called Docker files concept. We'll talk about it in the future. But this concept helps us to create Docker custom images. Then, so what do I do next? So you want to pull the image, right? Where are you going to pull the image from? Docker registry. Okay, but the image has to be available on Docker registry, right? If you want to pull it. So the image which I have built, now I'm going to push. So as a DevOps engineer, I have built that image. Once image is built, now I'm going to push that image. Where I'm going to push that image to? Onto Docker registry, Docker Hub. So what do you do then as a developer? Now you can try with so Docker pull and your image name. So let's say my image name is, I've given some image name like, let's say with something like this. Okay, my username. So if there are images with custom images, those image names starts with your username and the image name. Jenkins image. So finally, this is my image name. Now you're going to pull the image. As a developer, you're going to pull that image. And then you run the image. Are we clear? So custom images also possible to create, but the custom image names always start with username. What is the username means? On Jenkins, you see that you sign into account. Whenever you sign into your account, and your image names starts with your username slash your image name. Nothing but, so for example, I am creating an image. Okay, and with the same name, can you create an image? Let's say you are a user on Docker Hub. I'm also a user on Docker Hub. Can we both create a same image name? No. Why? Why? Why both? I mean, why two images cannot have the same names? Because image name starts with is that user name. So you cannot have so two images with same name on Docker registry. That's never possible. Are you clear? So understand the concept, understand the differences. So if you're able to understand these differences, you will be able to understand Docker. Otherwise, you won't be able to understand Docker. Simple. So if you want to start with Docker, you should know the concepts of what is a container, what is pulling, what is running. So why we are using a Docker container firstly. So if you know these concepts, then Docker will be interesting. Otherwise, you don't understand Docker. So that's why. So you just understand this concept. So this is an important question, comparisons. Okay, and let me show you these differences. I think. Let me do the comparisons again. So what we have covered so far. So this is what we have covered so far. So you have virtualization, and then you have Docker. This is your containerization. So firstly, for virtualization or in your containerization, you need some infrastructure. That means you need some host, and every host has host OS, host operating system. Okay. And then on virtualization, what do we install? We install the hypervisors like VMware Workstation, Oracle Virtual Boxes. In terms of Docker, what do we install? Docker Engine. Okay, And then, so on virtualization, we create the instances, instance 1, instance 2, instance 3. Every instance has its own guest OS. And then on that instances, then you have applications running, plus you have its application binaries running. But whereas in Docker, so do you see any guest OS concept? No. What do we have? We have only applications running without an OS. So that's what is your concept of containerization, Docker containerization. Okay. Okay. So so this is your concept of we talk about this concept later. So when we go to what do we call custom images, Docker files images, we talk about that concept. That's an important question actually. So look at the architecture. So we have seen the architecture so far, but anyway, so let me show you in picture. So now we have Docker host. On the Docker host, we have Docker so daemon. So what is a Docker daemon means? That's your Docker service. There is my Docker service running, which is your Docker host. And then I want to pull an image. So firstly, as a client, as a user, I want to pull an image. So how do you pull the image? Using Docker pull. And the request will be sent to the Docker service. And what Docker service does? Docker service is going to pull the image to where? To the Docker host. And then from where? From the Docker registry, that means Docker hub. And once image is pulled, then I can go with Docker run. So I'm running that image. So when I run it, now there you have image is created. So image is available, I'm sorry, image is available and it's creating a container. Okay. And if you want to, what is build is for? You want to build a custom image, you can go with custom image build option. But why do you call them containers? You can call something else. Why it is been named as a container? So container means it is easy to ship. That means you can easily move that. So what does it mean? So I have an application. Okay. So let's say I have an application. I have sample application. And this application needs some Tomcat 8.5. And also it needs about JDK. So these are a couple of requirements for the application. Then what do? I'm going to create an Docker image for this. I'm going to create an image. So once I create a Docker image, and that image I will be pushing to the Docker registry. Pushing means uploading to the Docker registry. After I push it to the Docker registry, then so if you want, you can pull the image, you can run the image. When you run the image, you have application is running. You don't need to install JDK, you don't need to install Tomcat. You can straight away have your application running. So that is what why we call it a container. So the applications are ready to run. You don't need to install something on it. So that's an advantage with Docker containers or Docker images. Okay. Then regarding the installation, so now Docker has actually two editions. One is Docker CE and then Docker EE. CE and then E. Docker editions. CE and then E. So E stands for Enterprise Edition and CE stands for Community Edition. Community Edition and then Enterprise Edition. So Docker has two editions. And Community Edition is free edition, so free. whereas Enterprise Edition is a licensed version. So licensing for Docker is very expensive licensing. They have almost like around they charge us approximately $1,100 or $1,200 per year per host. So take an instance. Now I have installed my Docker on one single host. So since you have installed that on one single host, I will be paying about $1,100 to $1,200 approximately on for one single host. If I want to have installed Docker on two hosts, then you'll be paying again for the next host. Okay, so you use the Docker containers whenever this is really required. So especially productions, so we need Docker containers. But when you go to development and then testers, so they are not too much requirement. But production, yes, that is required. Okay, so because of the licensing and the installation steps. So for Ubuntu, it's very easy. You can simply go with apt install Docker. That's easy. But whereas on CentOS 7, on RHEL 7, so the commands are different, the steps are different. I mean, so first you go with wget. Why we use wget? Download, right? You download it. So what are we downloading here? We are downloading, what is that? Docker CE repository. So why we are downloading Docker CE repository? The Docker is available on that Docker CE repository. Once you download the Docker CE repository, then you'll be able to install Docker. Otherwise, you won't be able to install Docker. Okay. So that is on RHEL 7 and CentOS 7. But on RHEL 8, you can install Docker using yum install Docker. So you don't need this CE repositories. RHEL 8, so they have upgraded their repositories with Docker. But for those who are installing the RHEL 7 on CentOS 7, so these are the steps. So download the Docker CE repository and then go with yum repo list. What is yum repo list is for? This is a new repository, right? Which is a Docker CE repository, and make sure you activate the repository. Then go with yum repo list, and then you can install Docker CE. Okay. So those who are interested to go with Ubuntu, very simple, apt install Docker. Okay. But on RHEL 8 again, it's very easy. Yum install Docker. Okay. Good. So let me show you that on. I will be doing on Ubuntu. I will take an Ubuntu, and so you can do these things on EC2 instances or virtual instances, whatever that is. You can do it on any instances. So that's not a problem. Everything is same. The concepts, everything is same. So those who are interested to go with EC2, you can set up EC2 instance and install Docker. Okay, and those who are with virtual instances, so I can provide this answer. RHEL 7, is it available on software's document? I think it's available on software's drive. RHEL 7. And for those who are interested in RHEL 7, it is. So RHEL 7 image is available. Is it available? Yeah, I think so. I think RHEL 7 should be there. So it's loading. Let's take its time. Don't worry. So I would go since I have any virtual instances. I will be trying only on EC2. Thanks. So we are interested with internet since so yeah, please preference. Or instead of launching the instance, I can take my existing instance, launch instance from your side. Once and let me check if I have, and I can use my existing instance. So I don't know what is the instance. That's not for you. Okay. So I think we must launch instance. So know what is the AIM I have. We have number of instances. I can't check for each and every instance. So take that Ubuntu 20. You can take a micro instance, T2 micro instance. Let's go with the free tier instance. And the default network, and storage, so the default storage, name the instance. Say Docker instance. I already have it the same name. Let's name it something. Docker instance CLS. Security groups. set the security groups and go with all traffic. So in the future, you can change it if it is required. Go the previous step. You forgot to check the source anywhere or IP addresses, but launch it. And which one? Take that. Okay. So that's instant, but still in pending status. So log into the instance. Super user, and then so install Docker. So apt install Docker. So it is docker.io. On Ubuntu they call it docker.io. So let's install Docker. What is that? Apt install Docker. Then okay, I think we need to apt update first. Let's go with apt update. Update the repository. Okay. So try that again. Apt install Docker. Yeah, go with update, install. So install successfully and check that service Docker status not installed. Why? 1 second. Why it was not installed? Docker service will not be found. Why it is not found? So it's already installed, but it is service not found. Service Docker status. Docker is installed, but service not found. Docker not found. This is weird. So they can call Docker, right? Why do they call it Docker.io? They know it. No one knows it. So when they call on Red Hat, when they call Docker, why they don't call Docker? Why they call it docker.io? Anyway, but so service Docker status. Now, so Docker is installed. So it was installed docker.io. So it's on Ubuntu. So is it there in the document? Yeah, it's there in the document anyway. So what is the status is? It's in inactive state. So I want to start service Docker, and then start. So Docker service is successfully running. Okay. It's active. Okay. Now I want to check this whether my Docker is successfully running. So I want to take an example. I want to take a hello world image, and let's do some trial that am I able to pull the images and am I able to run the containers. Okay, let's see. So firstly, go with the command called docker images command. So what is this command? This command gives list of images we have downloaded. So this is my new Docker host, right? So did we pull any images yet? So it is empty list. Now I want to pull the image. What image I want to pull? So which is hello world. So let's say hello world. For only for testing purpose, whether my Docker is installed successfully. Hello world image. So that is my registry. Search for that particular image. And then, so what is the command? Docker pull hello world. Okay. So Docker pull hello world. Now enter. So there is a message called default tag. So what is a default tag? Is latest. What do you mean by a tag? Tag means image versions. Image also have versions. We call them image versions. Now scroll down. So you have tags. So why do you have image tags, or why do you have image versions? So initially, let's say I'm creating an image. Okay, when I create an image, so initially I have given the version name as 1.0. In the future, I'm upgrading my image. Then I will be giving the tag name or the version name is 2.0. So we can modify the images. That's why we have different tags. Now, but what tag was considered by default? What was the tag name was? Latest. So do we have the latest tag? See the tag. What is the tag is? Latest. So if you don't mention any name for the image when you pull it, by default, latest tag will be pulled. Now, so check that Docker images for list of the images on the host. So that's my image name, and that is the tag, and that's image ID. So what is the image ID? When this image ID is created, whenever you pull an image, every image will be given an image ID by the host. Now for images, you have two unique attributes. What are they? Image name, image IDs. These are the two unique attributes for the image. For example, I want to delete an image. How do I delete it? Using some command. Let's say docker rmi, and then what? Image name or image ID. Okay. Well, now we have image pull. I want to run that image. What is the command to run it? Docker run. Now you can use image name or image ID. Both are same. Hello world. So now, so this message shows that installation appears to be working correctly. So Docker is successfully installed. That is the reason I'm able to run that image. So now, as soon as you run an image, it has to create a container. Well, so let's see whether the container is created. How do you see the list of containers? Docker PS. So do you have any containers in the list? The list is empty, right? So why this is happened? Or else let me give one more try. I'm going with again Docker pull and then so hello world. Sorry, not pull, I'm sorry. So do I need to pull it every time? No, right? Just run it. Run it. So this is successfully created. So everything is successfully so done. But why the container is not created? Let me check this again. So Docker PS, still the container is not created. Okay. So what is Docker PS then? Docker PS is for list of what containers? Running containers. Docker PS gives you list of running containers. Okay. So that means Docker containers has some status. So what are the Docker container status? The container status is, so what's the status? The container status can be running state. So that means up state. Up stands for running. Running state. And container can be also a status of exited. Exited means stop status. And container can be in pause state or else it can be created. So what is created state? Container is created with errors. A container is created successfully, but so not successfully. Container is created with some errors. So what are those errors? So there is some errors called port number volume errors anyway, but that container is created with some errors. Now, what is PS stand for? What PS gives us? Docker PS gives us list of running containers, containers which are in up status, running containers. Docker PS-A stands for all containers. All containers means including so running and then stop containers. So all type of containers. Now, how many times I have run that hello world image? 2 times. How many containers should be there? 2 containers. You see that I have container 1, right? And that's your container information. So what is information is that's container ID. You see that container ID, and then so what image has created that container? Hello world image command. We'll talk about it. And when this was created 2 minutes ago, and what is the status is exited state. Okay, and so when this is stopped actually, when this is stopped even 2 minutes ago, and what is that? That is your container name. So container name. So you have container ID. Also we have container name. I want to delete a container. How do I delete it? Either you can use container name or container ID. Now the question is why the containers are they creating? Yes, they are creating, but why they are going into exited state? So what is the reason? So we talk about this in tomorrow's session. Okay. So even if I try to pull another image, then the container will be in exited state. So why this is happening? Or how can I have my containers with up status? Okay. So we'll talk about that in tomorrow's session. And for today, you get your overall architecture picture first. So get that architecture knowledge, and later you try to install Docker. Whether install Docker on Ubuntu or on RHEL, that's your choice. So get this setup ready, and tomorrow we'll be looking into more containers. Okay, how to create the containers with different concepts. Okay. Any questions? Okay, thank you.